Alrighty then, we are live. We control the horizontal and the vertical. Is no time. Okay, it is 11 o'clock. Let's get started. How's everybody's day going so far? Cold. All right. Are there any upcoming presentations on campus that might be useful for your seminar evaluation? Like any thesis or dissertation seminars coming up in our programs here or across the campus? Are there any invited guest speakers coming in for seminars or anything across campus?
What you said?
Yeah. So if that's not coming through on our Zoom audio, Megan Alcazar, yeah, has her defense coming up soon. So that'll be typically about a 45 to 50-minute presentation of a bunch of hard work, and 5-10 minutes for questions after that. And after that, us hoi polloi, the peanut gallery, will be asked to leave the seminar venue, and we'll go into the closed door defense of her research. So the committee specifically get to ask kind of any question they want to. We'll talk a little bit more about what to expect with that process, how to prepare well for it in the right directions without over preparing, without under preparing. Although under preparing is rarely a problem for thesis or dissertation defenses for a lot of good reasons. But we'll talk about that stuff a little bit later on in the semester as we get closer to giving a practice proposal seminar presentation, the last couple of class sessions. Okay, but just keep an eye out for seminar and presentations going on. Highly recommend for the two seminar evaluations due for this class throughout the semester. Find a presentation or seminar that is outside your area of expertise. It could be even in the same department or program or whatever, but it's easier to not focus on the content, which we don't care about for the purposes of this class, and focus instead on the format, the peripheral routes to persuasion, as communication researchers call it, the diction patterns, the pacing, the posture, the eye contact, the graphical design elements of the presentation. Are there any printed handouts in case there's a technical snafu, which we should all be prepared for anytime there's a presentation, and so forth. And everybody is going to do some things well, probably a lot of things well at a university graduate level or a professional speaker level, but nobody's perfect, and we can all learn a thing or two from a couple of those presentations. So just friendly reminder to keep an eye out for those. And
how do you see those? You just go to the departments because they're not going to announce those.
Right. Yeah. So if you are headed across campus to get some delicious Chick-fil-A chicken nuggets, swing through any of the life science buildings or Feiner Hall or whatever. I try to go in Feiner Hall as little as possible, but there's a lot going on across campus. Okay. You do probably want to match the kinds of seminars that you find with your particular general projects format or mode, meaning quantitative or qualitative. So for example, an English PhD's final seminar is going to be really pretty different in some ways and markedly similar in others versus a field science PhD finishing up and presenting their work here in the college bag. So if you are quantitative, look for one or a couple of qualitative or quantitative presentations. And similarly for qualitative or heavily geospatial or secondary document research, like putting together a big lit review, whatever that looks like, probably be able to find several seminars of that type to choose from. Okay, but two of those throughout the semester for each of us. And in the syllabus, I put a simple, real quick, it's about a half-page form of what did this presenter do well, what didn't they do well, mostly as a way to just structure what can I learn from this, what can I take from it, how can I improve myself based on that person's successes and not failures, but areas for improvement. Okay.
It was a really good seminar series at the School of Biological Sciences, and I think it was fall, and so I don't know if anyone is doing as well.
Okay.
It was like really frequent and some really cool speakers came.
Oh,
I think it might have been from the seminar. I don't know if it was like that. But yeah.
cool. Right on. Let's see. We've got African American History Month. We've got all sorts of different like months coming up this spring, and it's a nice way to. We have Darwin Week on campus in the spring, I believe, and it's a nice way to have somebody else do the organizing of all these events for you, and just take your pick from a nice buffet of interesting intellectual delicacies. You all
Okay,
right?
So it doesn't have to be defense.
No, it could be any kind of. It could be. There was a TEDx series. If you're familiar with TED Talks, that's about halfway between pop culture and like a rigorous science seminar. Tends to incorporate elements of both with a very, very specific template. If you've seen one TED Talk, but you missed the title of like the TED logo at the beginning, you can still generally tell it's a TED Talk because they have a very specific format. That is useful, maybe somewhat less useful than something like a seminar, or there's a lot of invited speakers that are brought onto campus in all sorts of different departments. There'll be a lot of stuff for Earth Day, Earth Week, Earth Month. Keep getting it bigger as the situation gets more dire, and so on and so forth. So lots of opportunities throughout. Yeah. Biological sciences, geography has had a lot of good ones over the years. So wherever you like to look. Okay. Cool. And by all means, when you find one, if you can, let everybody know and help make everybody's job a little bit easier. You want to practice the skills of being a cohort and helping each other through. Basically, no cost to ourselves. So everybody does a little bit better when we function as a community. All right. So we were talking about our thesis template file, and that was kind of where we left class on Tuesday. Let's get back into that and kind of talk through things a little bit more. We had a chance just to kind of identify it and stare at the screen for a few minutes at the end of class last time. This time, let's really kind of move through and see how you can use that template file to add individual phrases or bullet points of text without paying the cognitive tax of trying to wordsmith it or even put it in much of an order. If we can get everything in basically the chapter it belongs in as a first or second step with this, we're off to the races. Okay. So let's pull that back up. And again, that's linked right from the front page of our course website on D2L. So it should be nice and easy to find. Would highly recommend with Word and PowerPoint and any other kind of file that is anything other than pure text or HTML, downloading it instead of using the web viewer. I'll use that for speed and convenience sake here in class, but D2L's web rendering setup for more advanced documents is okay, verging on not good and so harmful and not functional at its worst. Okay, so make sure to grab a copy of this. Some of you probably already have it, and just kind of keep this as a big scratch file. Let this file become your first outline level draft. So again, we started with a draft 1 of a research question. One person's already turned in draft 2 of a research question. And from there, we sort of wanted to place that research question in this larger template. So we see that it's typically for proposal about a third of the way through at the end of the introduction or at the end of the literature review. For literature review, the entire document is just the literature review chapter of proposal, but tends to be maybe a little bit longer than the literature review chapter of a proposal because it's the whole document. Then you got space to expand and kind of clarify lots of stuff. Whereas the literature review for a thesis or dissertation proposal is only a part of the larger thing and is used to get you to that research question. All right, so let's go through this formatting here and see how this document structure is designed to sort of save you answering a lot of questions that are fairly straightforwardly answered.
That was helpful though. So the proposal is just like a summary of our lit review. Smaller segment.
Yeah, so there's some particular quirks with literature reviews, especially with dissertations. So we'll talk about that stuff today and kind of hopefully clarify literature review as the document itself, literature review as a full chapter of your thesis proposal, later your thesis, right? It'll be the same literature review, copy pasted from one end to the other as time moves forward. And then for a dissertation, typically we have what's called a comprehensive literature review, which is a full chapter. And then after that comprehensive literature review, which covers all of the research that you are working on as a PhD student, typically the next 2 or 3 or up to maybe 4, if you're really aggressive, chapters, and after the lit review, each of those is a self-contained manuscript. Each of those manuscripts has a very short literature review, which might be a long couple of paragraphs, might be up to a couple of pages if that's appropriate for that particular article. But each of those, say on average 3 articles in a dissertation, will have its own introduction, lit review, methods, results, discussion, conclusions, works cited, figures throughout, figures at the end. And then there's like a unifying conclusion that is at the same chapter level as your comprehensive literature review to wrap up your entire dissertation, to tie it all together, to identify the wisdom and importance out of it. And then theses and dissertations as a last couple of chapters have its works cited, and then one or several up to many appendices. You can have as many appendices as you want. They can be as long as you want. Don't spend much effort on your appendices. You're just copying the data table output from Excel or SPSS or SAS or whatever, putting it in there so people can see your raw data, as well as seeing the analyses of those raw data in your results section. So if that's all very confusing,
Yeah.
we'll go through in a very systematic way. Yeah.
It's probably a dumb question.
Yeah. No, it's not. but
Okay,
yeah.
so from the graduate school webpage, I downloaded the document, template document for a research paper.
Uh-huh.
But is that, I really have to do a literature review.
Uh-huh.
Are those the same documents? I mean, that's the same. That's the same thing.
You're doing research. Your data
Okay,
are the papers that you uncover, your results and discussion, if you want to think about it that way, although you wouldn't title them results and discussion, are your synthesis and insight and interpretation of those papers. How do these all fit together? What does this bring us to?
okay,
Okay, yeah,
okay, so that's the correct kind of document.
okay.
Got it.
So a thesis or dissertation, more commonly a dissertation, can have what's called the manuscript format, which is what I just took you through. Chapter worth of introduction, chapter worth of literature review. Next chapter is an entire journal article manuscript with its own mini introduction, mini lit review, miniature, all the way through the end, which is typically works cited. And then the next chapter after that, the next manuscript, and then a chapter level discussion, but usually more like a conclusion to just kind of tie it all off, and then appendices, bibliography, all that stuff. Okay. A thesis can also have a chapter-sized introduction, a chapter-sized lit review, a 1 chapter-sized introduction plus lit review plus methods plus results plus discussion plus conclusion plus works cited. Okay. A journal article manuscript. Then that chapter size conclusion and full comprehensive works cited and all those appendices at the bottom or at the back. Or your dissertation or thesis can take what's called a book format, where you don't have kind of the middle 1 or 3 chapters as a standalone, pull it right out of your dissertation and send it off to a journal for review. It's just a introduction, chapter level, lit review, chapter sized, methods, chapter sized, results, chapter sized, discussion, chapter sized, and conclusions might be added in as a separate chapter or folded in with discussion. And then works cited and appendices and so forth. So the book format for your thesis or dissertation tends to be longer. There's no restriction on words. The manuscript format for your thesis or dissertation tends to be a little bit shorter because a lot of journals impose very strict limits on how long your journal article submission can be, anywhere from a couple thousand to 7,000 or 8,000 words, which sounds like a lot, but it's really not. You know, if each page is 500 words, let's say, on the basic abstract math of how long your paper should be, you know, a 7,000 word thing is only 14 pages. Okay. Now your literature review for a dissertation could be more than 14 pages by itself. Might be shorter than that, right? It really just depends on each dissertation. We'll talk about how to know when is enough, when they call it good and say, all right, this is what I'm going with. Got to stop and push this thing out the door. But it can be a little bit confusing. And at this stage, it doesn't really make much difference which format you want to take for your thesis or dissertation. That is the manuscript format with self-contained journal article drafts in there, or the book format where everything is its own single chapter and not miniaturized. Because your proposal is pretty much going to have those first couple, 3, 4 chapters: introduction, lit review, methods, maybe some anticipated results, and then the necessary but not particularly interesting stuff, you know, your works cited, bibliography list, that sort of thing. Most proposals don't have a lot of appendices because you don't have a bunch of data yet, right? You might have some additional site map figures for field or figure research, field or environmental research, and stuff like that. But for the most part, it's just those 3, 4 chapters, and that's all you really gotta concern yourself with for now. It's enough for now, for sure.
And you could always pull from the book to make your way, you know, if you
Right.
want to do it, you're like, you know what, I could do a journal on
Yep.
this.
Yeah, so the rationale with going with the manuscript format, it's shorter, but it's actually more work to write something that's shorter because you've got the same information to deal with either way. And if you got a book, you know, ramble on about your stuff long as you want to, you know. There's really no word limit, except for certain colleges I learned recently will put a word limit on your thesis or dissertation. I don't think that's a college about CALPS restriction by any means yet, but with the manuscript format, you know, you gotta deal with all of your information, all of your sources, all of your setup and explanation and interpretation, all that stuff, and fit it into strict, concise word limits. And spending, you know, up to hundreds of words of your budget on each figure or graph that you put in. So you need to editorialize and cut down from the master list of everything that you got quite a bit into those. So that's a decision for you and your advisor for a little bit later. If you are a fast writer, if you have a good working relationship, a high pace research group that you're working with, I would gently recommend doing a manuscript format thesis or dissertation because it's less work to set up those manuscripts once and then have those be the heart and soul of your thesis or dissertation than it is to go back to the book length work of all of your work when you're exhausted, having just finished your degree, and going back to that and going, all right, now I got to take this I'm not going to put a page number on it, this long thesis or dissertation, and edit that down into a manuscript. And there's going to be tears on the floor from cutting out, writers are told to kill their babies, take their interesting characters and do bad things with them to make an interesting plot. We, as researchers, are called to edit mercilessly, cut out stuff that seems so important, but it's just, this is not room. So you get really dense, sometimes hard to read technical writing in journal articles because of this artifact of having to physically print them out. Now with electronic journals and so forth, that restriction is eased somewhat. You can get some pretty long journal articles these days where they didn't have to spend nearly as much pathos and effort editing down, formatting down, because PDF can be as long as you want it to. Even so, most major journals, especially most of the major ones with an impact factor that you care about, that are high profile and so forth, that get your name out there as a professional, they do still have a paper counterpart, so they have pretty strict word limits. Okay, so you don't have to make this choice today. You don't even have to make it this month or this semester, but I think at some point, maybe have a informal chat with your advisor. What have your past 3 or 5 grad students done in terms of a book style format or a manuscript anthology format for your theses and dissertations out of your group? And whatever they say is not necessarily gospel for you, right? This is your document. But your advisor is somebody that you generally want to, weight fairly heavily in terms of advice, So whatever I'm saying, always triangulate this with your advisor and to a lesser extent your committee as well. Okay. Cool. So let's go through this document here. Let's put it up on the big screen here in the room. Hopefully everybody can see that on Zoom as well. And we'll get into it. So again, we talked on Tuesday just real briefly about the front matter. So these are typically 1 or a few pages long each. Most of this stuff is a set of things that you really don't want to spend much time or effort on. Okay, so if we're doing this wrong, you're going to be redoing the page numbers in your table of contents 3 or 4 or 5 times. That is absolutely 100% wasted effort beyond the first. So I will show you a little bit later how to create a self-paginating, so assigning page numbers, list table of contents. You'll also need eventually a list of figures, which is like a table of contents, but just for images, block level image type things like diagrams and illustrations, photos. You also need a list of tables. And for those of you doing a strongly quantitative thesis or dissertation like an ag econ thesis, a list of equations with page numbers. Equations are numbered just like tables and figures in a research document like this, so you know exactly which one you're talking about when you have several. All right, so don't worry about the hardbound cover. The graduate school provides a template for your title page, I believe for your copyright page, and our college has signed committee approvals forms. This is not really for your thesis proposal, right? This is something that comes at the end of the thing. And your committee members will physically or electronically sign that. I believe the graduate school still wants everybody to do an ink signature on those. You'll get a hand-signed copy of that, and it will be bound with the printed version of your thesis or dissertation. A scanned version of that will be inserted before you upload your final document to graduate school archive in the library. Okay, your abstract is typically 1 or up to a couple of pages long. If it's more than a page or 2 long, your abstract is not an abstract, it's what's called an executive summary. Okay, so you've got like the 1 or 2 sentence, 30-second elevator cell of what your research project is, how you would answer somebody at Thanksgiving when they ask, so what are you studying at school? Talking with family or whatever. Non-technical 1 to 2 sentence explanation. Your typically a conference submission abstract when you want to go talk with your peers at a professional conference about this is usually going to be a shortened version of your abstract which is itself a shortened version of your entire document. A conference abstract might be anywhere from 150 to maybe 300 or 400 words. Usually you don't get much more than that. And you send those in, a panel of your colleagues are saying, let's have somebody present on this one. This one doesn't sound so good. This one are great. This one sounds like a copy of somebody else's work from 5 years ago. Let's steer far away from that, and so on and so forth. Okay. Your abstract for this document is going to be a little bit longer. Again, anywhere from a few hundred words, 200, 300, 400 words, up to maybe a couple of pages if you really have trouble editing down. All right. You don't want to write new a single word in your abstract. Okay. Your abstract is not any new information, not one single word. Write your abstract after your proposal is written. Okay. And our outline format template makes this very easy and low stress. What you do is, after we've transformed this template on an individual basis from like a bullet point for project justification and a sub bullet point for each of the subheadings under project justification, the reason for being of your project, the raison d'etre, whatever. After that, each of those subheadings has a bunch of bullet points on the specific contents of that. You know, maybe one bullet point per study you've cited, one bullet point per idea, eventually a bullet point for the intro to this section, the outro out of that section, so forth. There's always very clear and careful sequential transitions from every sentence, every paragraph through this thing. We'll take you through all that stuff. It's not hard, it's just effortful. Okay. Once you've got this fully outlined level, you're just before the stage of writing sentences. You've got everything more or less in the order that you want it in your narrative. And you can go from bullet point to bullet point and see, okay, A goes to B, goes to C, goes to D. This makes sense. It's a cogent, flowing narrative, even in bullet point form, not even sentences. At that point is a great moment to take like the first or second, usually not both, bullet point and copy it into what will become a bullet point outline version of your abstract. Okay, so your abstract is like the most important sentence or two, and that might be all you get for each chapter of your thesis proposal or your eventual thesis or dissertation. Okay, so it is like 1 or 2 sentences to establish context and purpose, then 1 or 2 sentences to triangulate what you're about to propose against famous, prominent previous research, that's gone before and kind of set you up to do this project. And then 1 or 2 sentences of methods, how you're going to do this thing. And then really just 1 or 2 sentences eventually when you're transitioning from your proposal to your thesis or dissertation of what you found. And then 1 or 2 sentences of who cares? Why do we care? Why does this matter? What's important about it? That's your discussion and conclusions. So the whole thing might be 6, 8, 10 sentences. Okay. And again, writing an abstract could be really stressful if you got to sit down and write 1 paragraph to summarize your whole thesis or dissertation. Or you can realize you've already written your abstract. You just need to gather those bits together, turn them into sentences in 1 or a couple of paragraphs. Okay. So throughout the semester, we'll be looking at previous theses and dissertations to get a sense of how other people have done this. If I'm doing my job right, you write very few new words in copy pasting your proposal into your final thesis or dissertation. You'll have to make some adjustments, tense changes from we are going to do X, Y, Z to we did X, Y, and Z. And typically add some to the analyses section of your methods in your proposal because you don't know all the techniques you're going to use statistically at the outset. Sometimes you find some weird stuff in your data and you need to do some new analysis that you weren't even aware existed before you got to that point of doing the analysis and talk to the stats person on your committee. So we'll add some things to your proposal chapters in your thesis or dissertation, but not much. Okay, it is a huge waste of your precious time, very expensive time and energy to be rewriting any part of your thesis or dissertation proposal at any later stage for conference submissions, for front matter like the abstract, for transitioning from thesis proposal to thesis document. Okay. All right. So each of these, again, a page or two in the front matter. Some things like the dedication, great, that's optional. If you're really slammed for time and energy, everybody's going to understand that there were people that supported you and so forth. It is nice and good to capture that and say so, for sure. But you don't necessarily.
Really quick, I've
Yeah.
seen emails about hardcovers being sent to the graduates, like emails. So did we do that, or does the department?
That's a good question. In every place that I've been, I was going through all of this kind of at the very outset of electronic thesis and dissertation storage. So we had to do both. Some places have moved to exclusively online. They say, you know, dead tree versions of publications are so outmoded, that's so last century, you know. Gutenberg is rolling over in his grave, but I'm not sure what that answer is on a per college or graduate school level basis. Yeah.
So like the research librarian did say they want people to turn in the thesis to that, you know, like they have that whole section. So
Yeah.
definitely electronic work.
Yeah, and the forestry program has an entire reading room full of decades worth of theses and so forth. And that is a good thing. You need to, you know, print it on high quality archival paper so other folks can crack it open, you know, years from now and get good benefit from your hard work. But that's all details for a little bit down the road. So your advisor typically would write the foreword. You would typically write the preface. And like, you got so many other good important things to do. Don't chain yourself to a preface, please. Okay, that's like for somebody who's turning a thesis or dissertation or a bunch of other publications into a book, like a chapter book. It is unusual in my experience for your advisor to write a foreword, but it is, you know, it's respectful and professional to offer them the chance if they really want to. If you guys have a great working relationship, go for it. Dedication is different from acknowledgement. So we dedicate it to our cat, spouse, our significant other, whatever, you know, higher power, if that is an important part of your faith. Acknowledgements is more like, you know, Joe helped me collect a bunch of field data and it was really muddy and we lost one of our boots. I bet that thing is still out there. You know, I want to acknowledge the faithful contribution of the staff at Chick-fil-A, which will be a recurring theme in this class, you know, for supporting me calorically and all that. That's like specific folks who did specific things in acknowledgements. Table of contents, again, auto-generated. Do not spend 1 second writing that manually. Same thing with list of tables and figures. We've got some examples on the course website of documents templated with those set up for you. So in this class, you don't need to use Microsoft Word. It does have a bunch of kind of industry standard tools for academic writing. So it can make a lot of things a little bit easier for you. And you do have a free license to it as a student or staff at SAU. Okay. But you don't have to be locked into Bill Gates' vision of the future if you don't want to. Open Office, Star Office, etc., LibreOffice, they're all different flavors of the same kinds of thing. Okay, so we talked on Tuesday about how the introduction is starting at wide society, planetary, whatever level context in your particular theater of research. And right from the first sentence, we want to establish there's something important going on. It might be a problem, it might be an innovation, but it's important. And it, in some degree, touches a long span of time, or it affects a lot of people, or what have you. Okay, so start with a broad social research context of your topic. And then from there, move down into sort of a meso scale. What's a little bit more recent context? What are some recent developments in people trying to tackle your problem? So if you are looking at crop productivity, you might start by citing a figure about how, you know, maize, corn, is 7,000 or 8,000 years old. It has fed billions of people. And with climate change, for example, so moving into a more mesoscale thing of more recent developments in maize research, maize productivity is set to drop by double digits in even the southern half of the United States over the next 60 to 80 years, while population is growing. That's a problem. Supply going down, mouths going up in number, problem. Okay, so then we get down from there into a more tight focus of what are you focused on? What's the most immediate context? What are the most recent developments in your field? What is the most recent new problem that's cropped up that your project maybe is set to help address? So our corn research example, it might be something like we are testing recently mutagenic gene lines. We took a bunch of corn kernels, we irradiated them, we mutated their genetic material, planted them, and we saw which ones did well under a higher carbon, higher temperature, lower precip regime like we think we'll have in certain areas, especially west of the Mississippi. That's pretty specific. All right. So we go from broad to specific, just like popular news articles do not do. They start much more specific. And we go from there. The project justification, again from Tuesday, can be at the end of your introduction as you've explained and introduced and started to detail the different scales of the problem or innovation that you are working with. That sets up the reason for you doing this research, right? We have lots of mouths to feed in the next 8 decades. That's a justification for trying to improve maize productivity under changed climate conditions. Okay. The other place to put the project justification is at the end of the comprehensive literature review, but more commonly it comes at the end of the introduction. So we have, as obvious and on the nose as it is, state the need for the study. If we don't figure this problem out, people are going to have less access to nutrition, and the World Food, Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN are stating that tens to hundreds of millions of people are going to starve to death on our watch. That's a problem. So we feel like this is a pretty important project. You want to touch on the potential benefits of your study. Be careful with this particular paragraph or two, maybe even a couple of sentences. It's a common thing for graduate students to either really be very timid about the benefits of their project, in which case, give yourself some credit. You're working your tail off for years to address something. This matters, right? You're not picking trivial problems. Or they tend to sort of overgeneralize, which we'll talk about more in the philosophy of research piece, where it says this is going to solve everything for everybody for all time. Kind of oversell. Just be real eager about it. So be frank. We think we can increase the oleic fraction content of maize through careful application, selection, and crossbreeding, to the point that it is nutritionally sustainable for people eating from that particular crop. And that's the more specific and careful you are about not overstating and not underplaying or underselling your benefits of the project, the less chance anybody has to dispute this and say, are you daydreaming? Like, are you really going to invent cold fusion in 2 years? And that sort of thing. Okay. So the project justification is typically a section under introduction, and it may be listed as its own heading under the introduction chapter, or inside the introduction chapter, sorry. Very rarely do you get a project justification as a top-level chapter as it's listed here, but it's listed as a top-level section in this outline because this is something you want to be real clear on with your project. Why are you doing this degree? It might just be to get the piece of paper, get the credentials and so forth, but okay, take a step back from that. What is the point of your project? A lot of us are subsidized on government-funded grants or industry grants. Why did that organization, the executive branch of the government or You know, Purina, major food and grain processor. Why did they see the need to fund your study and pay your stipend and tuition, stuff like that? Okay, I can help answer that justification question. Either way, after that, we're going to get into the comprehensive literature review, which is pretty much always a separate chapter. Some fields like to roll together introduction and literature review for the sake of brevity, but I think it's easier and clearer to the reader if you have a separate chapter for it, and it's a very common separate chapter anyway. All right, so it's called a comprehensive literature review here because in this outline template, this has the manuscript format, self-contained articles, each with their mini literature reviews, or much more tightly targeted smaller literature reviews for each manuscript as well. The comprehensive literature review collects all of everything across what you cite in those mini literature reviews and organizes it into a single flowing cohesive narrative. When your entire document is the literature review, you would sort of edit the bullet points of the introduction and the project justification and the comprehensive literature review and call that the literature review chapter, or make each heading under the comprehensive literature review a chapter in your literature review. That's only for literature review projects. For folks doing a thesis or a dissertation, comprehensive literature review is genuinely separate from the introduction conceptually, right? This is context in the introduction, and it is previous research specifically in literature review, okay? So pick any one of your major theories, probably the oldest one first, okay? We tend to get more sophisticated and functional with our theories as we go. Science is a continuously self-revising, updating, editing, and editorializing thing. So if you're not sure how to order things in your lit review, you can't just go with oldest to newest, because that's gonna leave you at the end of the lit review of stuff that was done this year and this past year, and leave us all hanging on what has not been done, right? So our research question, we've already started it, right? The whole point of the literature review is to inform us, to show that there's been some work done and that we are aware of it. We've done our due diligence. We understand what the giants have done before so we can stand on their shoulders. And to demonstrate that nobody else has already answered our research question. If they have, we're maybe wasting our time, unless we're doing a very, very, very specific kind of research project to replicate results, to prove that somebody else isn't lying about the results. It's 2022, that's a thing we have to do now sometimes. So comprehensive literature review goes from sort of oldest or most general, sort of least functional body of theory, and typically you'll have one or several bodies of theory to organize, put them in sequence conceptually. And it takes a little bit of reading, but also time away from reading and thinking about the reading to be able to do this. So if you're not real sure what that's going to look like yet for your proposal, that's okay. Right? Just keep reading sources. Keep reading sources and throwing things in your comprehensive annotated bibliography. So we'll introduce that assignment as well.
So as we're seeing our different, because obviously different categories combined in our literature, different areas. So within those areas, we're going to decide how to organize them, obviously. Like, let's say we have multiple sections or different topics, then within those we can go oldest to youngest, or we can tie the topics between themselves to create another order if we so see that. It's not like now I'm doing all the well-being, now I'm doing all the nature, now I'm doing all the resilience. It's just what we kind of see emerging.
Right.
Or
so
we recommend doing oldest to youngest on all the different areas that we're reading.
yeah, so very commonly you'll have a more recent, functional, chunky, mechanistic theory of how something works and why you're going to do your thing your way. It was built off of some previous model. So thinking about theories and models on the nature of matter. Now we have quantum physics and grand unification theory that pretty well rolls together. You and I are made of cells, which are made of molecules. Molecules are made of atoms. Atoms are made of subatomic particles. Those subatomic particles are made of vibrating strings, and so forth. And we're just a bunch of continually destroying and creating matter and antimatter reactions. But in order to get to the quantum physics theory of matter, we had to have the pudding ball theory of matter, which suggested that all things are irreducibly made of atoms. And atoms describe particular elements based on the number of subatomic particles, the number of protons in the nucleus of those atoms. Well, we didn't know that electrons sort of swirl around the outside of nuclei until after the bread pudding, sort of like the donut hole model of an atom is just this chunk of, base gold or aluminum or lithium or neon or whatever, right? These theories build on each other. We test them, and the test breaks part of the old theory, and we say, well, that can't be, so let's revise that theory. This is the new version with electron orbitals. And now quantum physics says that those orbitals aren't lines with electrons going around them like in the 1950s, stamped on the outside of nuclear reactors or on the Jetsons cars. It's now a probability field of where that electron subatomic particles could possibly be. It's not a track that they're flinging around on, okay? So we take the old, the general, the useful, in its most basic sense, but fundamentally wrong model. We use it to set up the next one, set up the new one, set up the new one. In your project, you probably don't need to go back to the equivalent of, the bread pudding ball model of the atom. Like most folks who are reading your thesis or dissertation at a technical level, they got that. We can jump right into maybe just the electron orbital model and then quantum physics, or just quantum physics and spend your entire lit review inside of that. There's a lot of different research to summarize just within that area. Okay, so general, least useful, but helpful in explaining something model to the most specific, newest, mechanistic, well-validated model in your field. Okay. Let's see. Within that, at this point, don't worry about putting in transitions. So connecting every study that your study relies on together with intros and outros and segues and conceptual links between A and B. Just at this point, throw in the 3-word or the 1-sentence thing that you need out of a previous study. Put the citation next to it in plain text or using your citation manager. We'll work through that tool in a future class. And then move on to the next bullet point. We're not wordsmithing, we're not crafting, we're just getting stuff, plugging things in, right? So the draft 1 that we completed of your thesis proposal outline, just chapter headings and top level headings, right? So if your introduction chapter or top level bullet point has a project justification bullet point and a context bullet point and so forth, and no actual citable factual information, that's great for a first draft. You've already got your information architecture set up, and it's ready for you to start parachuting in each of those citations as you're finding it, okay? In any order, right? Just open the document, get it in there so you don't have to think about it, and then move on to the next paper. We'll worry about the sequencing, the wordsmithing, and the crafting later. Okay. All right. And then, of course, after the the comprehensive literature review, copy paste in draft 1 of that research question. So here's all the things we know, and these imply something eventually when we've sequenced that narrative, sequenced all those sources and stuff, and put them into sentence form. Now we need to know what we don't know yet, and that's your research question, okay? objectives, timeline, and so forth. Fairly easy, and for a first draft of a proposal, we're not even gonna touch that stuff really. Okay, cool. Any questions so far? We gotta stop. It's 10 till, but I'm here for questions. So download this, start dumping things in. This document's gonna look like mess for a couple of weeks at least, unless you're a little bit further along already.
So you said download this and you can copy and paste. You can essentially, you are saying just copy and paste this so that we can start.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't want you to have to spend any stress on reinventing the wheel. This format's been around for a couple of centuries. Okay. So use it, you know, don't throw yourself onto the rocks and break yourself up to try and get something new and like reinventing science to communicate your ideas. Okay. All right. I'll post a couple of drop boxes and so forth for, setting in a second draft of your outline as we start to add in subheadings and so forth. So for example, under methods, we can start packing up. I gotta get going. Under methods, we'll have a research site. We'll have timing, budgeting, the equipment, the anticipated analyses, the research field procedure like data collection, data hygiene, chain of custody, data error proofing, steps, and all that stuff just sort of listed in there. For our second attempt on the outline, it's just methods and site description and anticipated analyses, just literally those phrases, okay? You don't have to put in any content yet. This next draft, you get this thing built out together. All right, so now that we've had a chance to go through that, next class session, we'll actually pull out Microsoft Word, bring your laptop, and we'll start coding this stuff up so that your literature review and stuff like that, or excuse me, your table of contents don't need to be handwritten and stuff like that. I'll show you how to do all this stuff. It's super easy once you figure it out. Okay. See you next time. Sorry we ran long. Catch you later.
Thank you.
And I was doing like the bare basics, and I was like,
Yours is hard.
Well, that's why I think I'm just thinking. I appreciate the comfort. If nothing else, at least it's coming across calm.
big words. Financially, every.
That is